This is a honey badger. Nothing scares him. He keeps on coming.
The biggest problem facing those who want to eradicate the Burmese python is the sheer vastness of the region.
Florida thought it was winning the war against deadly pythons.
The python hunting. I think in Florida now, anyone can hunt a python, and you get a prize too. Like you get money.
Until shredded snake carcasses started surfacing in the swamps. Hunters whispered of something tearing through nests before they even arrived. Then came the leaked email. It's done. No explanation, no sender, just chaos. Now, rumors are flying. Did Florida secretly unleash the world's most fearless predator to fix its snake nightmare? And if they did, what happens when that predator turns on everything else? Stick around, because what comes next will shock you. The pet that turned into a predator plague. At first, nobody paid much attention. A few odd reports from park rangers, a thick coil moving through the reeds, a shed skin stretched longer than a man, just sounded like another Florida story. But then the sightings spread. Joggers, hunters, even homeowners started calling in the same thing.
They say the hunt is for a good cause, to save rabbits, raccoons, even deer that are being eaten up by all these pythons.
Something big was moving out there, and it didn't belong. The truth traced back to something almost laughable. A pet fad that spiraled into disaster. In the 1970s, Burmese pythons flooded the U.S. pet trade. They were sold cheaply and small. They looked harmless enough behind glass, until they weren't. Within a few years, those little pets were growing past 15 feet, eating rabbits, cats, and anything that moved. When owners realized what they had brought home, most panicked. Some tried to give them away. Others just opened their doors and let them go, thinking one snake loose in the wild couldn't do much harm. But Florida's warm, wet swamps turned that mistake into a perfect breeding ground. With no predators, no cold winters, and endless prey, those few escapes multiplied into thousands. By the early 1980s, the evidence was impossible to ignore. Hunters stumbled on massive snakes coiled in trees.
Pythons have made a significant impact, a negative impact on the health of the ecosystem. It throws off the entire ecosystem.
And biologists began noticing native animals vanishing. Yet officials brushed it off as a coincidence, assuming these were just random pets gone feral. That delay gave the invasion time to explode. Now, decades later, the Everglades are crawling with them. Tens of thousands of Burmese pythons, maybe more, are moving across hundreds of miles of swamp and canal. The scale of the invasion is no longer guesswork. It's measured in losses so severe, even scientists were stunned. In Everglades National Park,
Well, Nicole, roughly 45 park rangers are not working here at the Everglades, in addition to other limitations as a result of this shutdown. And now,
a 2012 study found that since 1997, raccoon numbers had collapsed by 99.3%, opossums by 98.9%, and bobcats by 87.5%. Entire sections of the park that once teemed with small mammals have fallen silent, their absence marking the steady advance of the python. These snakes have done what few invasive species ever manage. They've completely rewritten an ecosystem. The cascade was absolute. A 2012 study by Michael Dorcas documented the devastation. In areas with pythons, 11 mammal species showed severe to complete population collapses. Marsh rabbits, once everywhere, vanished entirely from some regions. The ecosystem wasn't adapting. It was being strangled by a single invasive predator that had no natural enemies. And it isn't just mammals.
The mangroves here in Florida have an impressive array of bird species, but it's also home to a very curious mammal.
Birds, reptiles, and even alligators have suffered as the Burmese python tightens its hold. With a stable breeding population spread across South Florida and no natural predators to keep them in check, their numbers have exploded into the tens of thousands, a conservative estimate that grows each year. But the nightmare doesn't stop there. While Burmese pythons steal the headlines, other giants have quietly joined them. Green anacondas and boa constrictors are now establishing footholds of their own, adapting fast and spreading wider. Florida's wetlands have become a melting pot of invasive snakes, each one carving deeper into territory that once belonged to native species. By the time the pythons pushed north toward Lake Okeechobee, models from the University of Florida warned that rising temperatures could soon open the rest of the state to invasion. What started as a novelty pet craze has become one of the most devastating ecological disasters in modern U.S. history. And as Florida scrambles for solutions, the next step they take will sound too strange to be real until you see what follows. Florida's war that changed nothing. By the early 2000s, Florida declared all-out war. The Python Challenge launched, drawing thousands of hunters for 10-day bounty events with cash prizes. Authorities have thrown everything at the problem: hunts, traps, bounties, even high-tech tracking. But nothing sticks. Every captured snake seems replaced by more unseen, growing, breeding, and waiting.
You know, this snake could be sitting here, ambushing a mammal that's coming up here to get what's left of the...
By the early 2000s, Florida's wildlife officials had declared an all-out war. The state launched the Python Challenge, a public hunt that drew thousands of volunteers from around the world. For 10 relentless days each year, hunters waded through swamps with rifles and snake hooks, collecting cash bounties for every python caught. The rewards were huge: $50 for small ones, extra pay per foot for larger ones, and hundreds for locating nests before they hatched. On paper, it sounded like victory and progress. In reality, it barely made a dent. Technology joined the fight. Drones with thermal cameras scanned the wetlands for heat signatures. Then came the Judas snake, captured pythons fitted with trackers and released during breeding season. When they sought mates, the signal led hunters to hidden clusters. It was clever and occasionally effective, but pythons reproduce faster than hunters can track them. Water samples were tested for traces of python DNA to locate unseen nests. Even dogs trained to detect their scent combed through the marsh. It was the most advanced invasive species campaign in the world, costing more than $3 million. By 2023, researchers estimated the window for ecosystem recovery was closing. Without drastic intervention, within 5 to 10 years, the mammal populations might never return, even if every python vanished tomorrow. But despite all the effort, the results stayed small. Pythons can live up to 30 years, produce dozens of eggs each season, and vanish for months without eating.
What an amazing animal the python is. I mean, consider, here's an animal that can go a month, even year without eating.
Perfect survivors in a landscape built for them. For every giant pulled out of the swamp, more were breeding unseen. That was the breaking point. Faced with failure on every front, Florida's scientists and wildlife officials began considering a solution so unexpected, so outrageous, that it sounded like a joke, until they actually tried it. The idea no one dared to say out loud. Somewhere in a Florida wildlife office, someone asked the forbidden question: what if we stopped fighting fair? What if we unleashed something meaner than the pythons themselves? By the mid-2000s, the Everglades crisis had bottomed out. Scientists and field teams were out of options and running on fumes. The high-tech hunts, the bounties, the tracking collars, all of it barely slowed the invasion. Inside those dim offices, desperate researchers tossed out ideas that bordered on science fiction. Inside dim offices, desperate researchers proposed everything: radio transmitter implants to track breeding aggregations, detector dogs trained on python scent, even experimental trapping arrays. Each failed for the same reason: the Everglades were too vast, and the snakes too good at hiding. Sonic traps that mimicked mating calls to lure them out. Each proposal fell apart under cost, risk, or sheer impossibility. The snakes were multiplying faster than anyone could react. Then came the brutal verdict from the experts themselves. Total eradication wasn't possible. The best they could do was contain it, a polite way of saying, "We're losing." Hunters came back empty. Locals complained their land had gone silent. Headlines shifted from hope to resignation.
Another one, clearly, that we know very little about is disease.
The pressure to do something or anything was unbearable. That's when the unthinkable option crept back into the conversation. Biological control. The idea had a cursed history. Australia tried it with cane toads in the 1930s, a move that backfired spectacularly, creating a toxic invasion of its own. Hawaii did it with mongooses, and they wiped out native birds instead of rats. Everyone knew how those stories ended. But when the Everglades started going quiet, people stopped caring about history lessons. And that's when the internet took over. A single meme lit the fuse. A viral clip of a honey badger tearing into a cobra, paired with the line, "Send him to Florida." At first, it was a joke. Photoshop edits, hashtags, and fake recruitment posters calling them snake SWAT. But the more the idea spread, the less it sounded like a joke. Honey badgers were fearless, immune to venom, and relentless in a fight. To a public fed up with failure, they looked like nature's last hope. Officials kept silent, but inside the agencies, the question had already shifted from "should we?" to "what if we did?" And that's where the legend of Florida's most controversial plan was born. Before we move on, if you're hooked by what's coming, hit the like button so we know you want more deep, unsettling science stories like this. The predator they thought could save Florida. When Florida officials first whispered about unleashing honey badgers, even the skeptics paused. On paper, this creature looked like the perfect answer. A fearless, venom-proof predator that already made cobras look weak. But before anyone could judge the plan, the question had to be asked: what exactly were they thinking of letting loose? Meet the honey badger, small, stocky, and nearly indestructible, native to Africa, the Middle East, and parts of India. It's not built for beauty, but for brutality. Guinness World Records once called it the most fearless animal on Earth. And that title isn't hype. These things attack anything that moves, from venomous snakes to lions, and they almost always win. Their toughness starts with design. Their skin is thick and rubbery, loose enough that even if a predator grabs them, they can twist around and bite back mid-attack. Their claws are long and curved like mini pickaxes, perfect for digging or ripping through tough hides. Their jaws can crush bone and scale alike, and somehow, their bodies shrug off snake venom that would kill a dog in minutes. And their bodies possess unusual resistance to snake venom. While a cobra bite might incapacitate them for hours, they can recover and resume activity, a survival trait almost no other mammal shares. Even their young are trained for war. Mother badgers teach their cubs to handle venom step by step, starting with small scorpions, then moving up to full-grown cobras. Over generations, that brutal training built near immunity, making the species a nightmare for any snake unlucky enough to cross its path. And it's not all brawn. They're smart, unusually so. Researchers have recorded them using tools, dragging sticks or stones to reach prey or escape enclosures. In the wild, they've been seen outsmarting much larger animals, harassing prides of lions, or exhausting antelopes through sheer persistence. Viral clips have only fed their legend. It has captured them attacking pythons, dragging snakes from burrows, and surviving prolonged battles. Documented behavior that made them seem built for this exact problem. Or the footage from Botswana in 2019, where one broke free from a python's coils, turned, and dragged the snake off alone. That kind of raw, fearless energy was exactly what desperate officials thought could save the Everglades. But unleashing it into Florida's fragile ecosystem would test whether nature's toughest survivor could be savior or destroyer. Clash in the swamp, when the predator became the punisher. When grainy footage allegedly surfaced showing a black and white blur attacking a python in Florida swamps, the internet exploded. Real or staged, it reignited whispers that Florida had done the unthinkable. At first, most dismissed it as an escaped zoo animal, but the timing lined up too neatly with the state's secretive python control experiments, and that single clip reignited a theory many thought was a joke, that Florida had quietly armed itself with nature's most fearless killer. On paper, the matchup looks impossible. Burmese pythons can stretch 19 feet and weigh over 200 pounds.
Yesterday, this snake ate a massive meal. The rat it consumed weighed more than a third of the snake's own body mass.
One was caught in 2023, thick as a fire hose. In comparison, a honey badger barely clears 30 pounds. Yet size isn't the story here. Ferocity is. In Africa, badgers regularly take down rock pythons nearly as large, slipping from coils with loose skin and counterattacking with claws that shred scales like paper. They don't retreat. They don't freeze. They fight until the air goes still. Florida's advantage lies in numbers. Most pythons here aren't giants. They're juveniles, 6 to 10 feet long, perfect targets for a predator built to raid nests and ambush movement. A single badger could wipe out dozens of eggs before they ever hatch. Hatchlings, still small enough to fit in a coiled paw, wouldn't stand a chance. The logic is brutal, but simple. Hit the population where it starts. While alligators and crocodiles only occasionally strike adult snakes, badgers would strike the full life cycle: eggs, juveniles, and even wounded adults. In theory, a few hundred badgers could do what millions of dollars in bounties and manhunts never achieved. But there was one calculation nobody wanted to make. Honey badgers don't stop hunting when their preferred prey disappears. They adapt. They expand. And Florida had just handed them 4,000 square miles of undefended territory. The badger backfire, when the cure becomes the curse. At first, the idea sounded wild enough to work, but soon after the whispers of badgers for pythons spread, scientists began warning about something far worse.
I've seen some hives where the badgers actually got in from the side and chewed through this 22-millimeter wood.
A nightmare no one in Florida was ready for, because if these animals ever touched down in the wild, they wouldn't stop at snakes. They'd eat everything. Honey badgers don't specialize. In their native habitats, they've been recorded preying on more than 60 species, including insects, birds, reptiles, and even livestock. They eat bones, scales, and shells without hesitation. And in a place like Florida, packed with over 700 land animals and 250 plant species found nowhere else on Earth, that kind of appetite could wipe out decades of conservation work in just a few years. Take the sea turtles along Florida's coasts. Every year, roughly 20,000 nests hold millions of fragile eggs buried in soft sand. For a honey badger, that's not conservation, that's a buffet. The same goes for American crocodile nests. Shallow and unprotected, their fragile eggs exposed to a predator that sees no difference between a python clutch and an endangered species. And what's worse, Florida has no natural defense against them. Panthers are nearly gone. Black bears avoid fights, and alligators would likely lose to an animal known to drive lions off kills. The result? A new apex predator without limits, replacing one invasive nightmare with another. History already wrote this script. Hawaii's mongoose introduction wiped out native birds instead of rats. Harlequin ladybugs, brought in for pest control, spread across 50 countries, destroying local species and crops. Each time, it started the same way, a quick fix that spiraled into an ecological disaster. Even outside the lab, badgers have proven impossible to contain. In South Africa, one named Stoffel became infamous for breaking out of every cage he was locked in.
And then he pulls it open, he waits for her to get down, and they escape together.
Using sticks, rocks, and even stacked objects to climb fences and escape.
The intelligence is just beyond anything.
If Florida thought it could fence these creatures in, history says otherwise. One look at the data, and the dream collapses. The perfect predator suddenly looks like the perfect storm, a ticking time bomb wrapped in fur. And then, in the middle of the chaos, came the two words that would send Florida spiraling into fear. The leak that sparked the Florida panic. The clue that something had gone horribly wrong didn't come from a scientist or a field report. It came from a blurry screenshot. In January 2024, a pixelated image hit social media, an internal Florida Wildlife Commission email, or so it seemed. Just two words stood out in bold. It's done. There was no sender or context, just a timestamp and a thread labeled Habitat Recovery Operation. Within hours, the internet lit up with one burning question. Had Florida actually released honey badgers into the Everglades? The rumors spread like wildfire. By noon, the post had racked up tens of thousands of shares. Forums dissected every pixel. TV hosts debated whether the state had secretly unleashed one predator to kill another. And for a moment, it all felt like online noise, until the first strange reports started surfacing from the swamps. Veteran python hunters began finding carcasses ripped open in ways no gator or bobcat could explain. The bodies weren't eaten, they were shredded, skin peeled back, organs torn, scales scattered. One hunter's voice memo, trembling as he described the scene, like something angry got inside it, went viral within hours. Then came the lockdowns. Several restricted zones in Big Cypress and the southern Everglades were suddenly sealed off for habitat restoration. There were signs bearing no entry, no press, no photos. Drone hobbyists caught what officials denied existed. Blurry shapes darting across sawgrass at dusk, low and fast. Black and white streaks vanishing into the mangroves. Hunters reported glowing eyes that didn't match snakes or gators. Each time FWC called them mice-identified otters, the denials only fueled the fire. Then the python logs leaked. Capture numbers had dropped sharply, 20, sometimes 30%, in those same closed zones. There were no storms, no migration changes, just silence where snakes used to swarm. To the internet, it was proof. To wildlife officials, it was chaos. By spring, It's Done had become legend, a two-word confession that Florida had crossed the line. Memes turned into a movement. Reporters started camping outside FWC offices. And out in the swamps, something was clearly changing. The python drop that changed everything. Recently, hunters entering the Everglades found something no one expected. The pythons were gone. Nests lay empty, eggshells crushed, and half-eaten carcasses floated in the reeds. Whatever was wiping them out wasn't human, and it was working faster than any weapon Florida had ever tried. 2025 Florida Python Challenge wasn't just big. It shattered every record in the book. The 2025 Florida Python Challenge ran from August 9th to 18th. Over 800 registered hunters removed 209 Burmese pythons, matching the 2023 record, but not breaking it. Officially, it was a success. But the whispers told a different story. Officials praised new field strategies and community engagement. But behind the press smiles, field trackers whispered about something else: how python nests had gone quiet in the southern zones. Field reports suggested declining python activity in some areas, though official eDNA data remained unpublished. Some online theories suggested state officials knew more than they were saying, though no evidence of classified briefings surfaced. Then came the truth. Hunters started posting shaky drone clips, showing flashes of black and white tearing through the reeds, quick, low, unmistakably aggressive. Something was hitting the pythons before people ever got to them. By dawn, half-eaten carcasses floated in the marshes. Wildlife officers blamed scavengers. Locals weren't buying it. Badger apocalypse, one hunter muttered, as he filmed a shredded coil under his floodlight. And strangely, the swamps began to feel alive again. Raccoons, rabbits, and opossums crept back into territories long ruled by snakes. Birdsong returned to stretches that had been silent for years. It looked like nature was healing, but not cleanly. Sea turtle nests were torn open, crocodile clutches thinned out. The same sharp claws that might have cleared the pythons were carving fresh scars into Florida's fragile balance. By October, the question hanging over every wildlife report was no longer if the badger theory was true. It was what happens next. Pythons were down, but the food web was shaking. There was no proof that honey badgers were involved, but there was also no clear explanation for what caused the sudden dip. Residents near the Everglades claimed to see small black and white shapes darting through the brush at night. Others swore they heard guttural growls echoing through the mangroves, sounds no one could identify. The phrase, "It's done," still hangs in the air. A ghost with no author. Maybe the operation was real. Maybe it was never needed. Either way, the Everglades feel different now, quieter, hungrier, and waiting. So we will leave you with this. Did Florida really unleash honey badgers to fight pythons? Or did fear itself become the weapon? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. And if you want to be here when the next chapter unfolds, hit subscribe and stay curious. The story of what comes next is already being written. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.